LD Comics is a women-led, welcoming to all forum run by creators. We champion the graphic novel form, particularly works with an autobiographical voice. Our activity is towards supporting and equipping graphic novelists, especially but not exclusively people identifying as women. Established in 2009 by Sarah Lightman and Nicola Streeton as Ladies Do Comics, today LD Comics is run by a committee of published graphic novelists: Rachelle Ball, Emma Burley, Lou Crosby, Wallace Eates, and Nicola Streeton. From the start, the core of LDC's activity has been the monthly meetings, hosting presentations from invited guests to a public audience in a welcoming atmosphere for networking and making friends. The introduction of LDC online monthlies aims to replicate the joy and stimulation of our physical meetups. Everyone is welcome.
So, hey everyone, I'm George Wylesol. I am an artist from Baltimore, USA. I'm going to be presenting this slideshow. I'm actually just going to paste it in the chat in case anyone wants to look as well, but I'll share my screen here. Okay. So I'm going to talk about my new graphic novel called Curses, which is out now through Avery Hill Publishing. Yeah, let's get started. So this is my new book, Curses. And this is me, George, and I am a cube. I'm an artist and educator, and have written a few graphic novels. I did Curses, I did Ghost, etc. in 2017 through Avery Hill. I did Internet Crusader in 2019 and 2120, all with Avery Hill in the last couple of years. But today I'm going to talk about my new book, Curses, which is out now. Curses is a collection of short experimental comics made between 2015 and 2023. There's a lot of just variety here. The big point to this collection was to compile everything I made between, these years, almost about 10 years, that never really had a place. I would post this kind of work to Instagram, and then it would, immediately get forgotten. I kind of forgot that I made a lot of this stuff. And then we decided to kind of recompile everything and, produce it in a new book called Curses. Yeah. In every story in the collection, something disastrous happens, either very explicitly or implied, hence the title. And I made most of these comics between 2015 and 2018. I had just graduated grad school, and I was working in tech support in a bunch of hospitals on the East Coast of the US. I had been doing this hospital tech support job for about 10 years, and it was a really good job. I had a lot of downtime. So I'd always bring in my laptop and just work in my office, right? I had like a 9-hour shift, but I'd only have to work like 2 actual hours of doing stuff. So I would just sit at this weird desk all day and just like make experimental comics just to kind of keep busy, right? Because it was actually like so boring. But a lot of the work in Curses came from like this environment, right? Right. So this was my headspace at the time. I was working in a lot of these kind of back areas, utility closets, penthouses, attics, basement storage rooms, right? And a lot of the art in Curses was really inspired by this environment that I was working in for so long. So I just have like a lot of the art to show. I'll just kind of stay on each slide for, a few seconds just to show off all the different kind of stuff that's going on in here. We have a lot of work in here that's just like a single page kind of experimental narrative, but there are also some longer pieces that range from, 10 pages to, I think the longest one is about 100 pages. Since this work evolved over so long, you really see like a wide range of like visual styles and inspirations. I kind of use each comic in the book as just a chance to experiment with mostly with artistic process, like trying out different techniques, trying out different media. I work mostly in Adobe Illustrator, which seems like a very kind of limited program. It doesn't seem like there's a lot you could do at first with Illustrator, but I've actually found that um, there's so much you can do with the program. And actually that's where most of the art started, was working with Adobe Illustrator. I'm also experimenting a lot with like the narrative and the setup, right? Like what kind of story can you tell? I feel like a lot of comics can be fairly straightforward, right? And just experimenting with different art techniques and different formats um, over the past, 10 years was really, liberating. That's me laying on the floor at the hospital. One thing I really enjoyed about working on this collection was the ability to go back into old work and edit. I never was much of an editor at first when I started, working as an artist. Um, and I never like kind of felt like doing editing. I finish a piece and move on. I like that instant gratification of, finishing an artwork, posting it on social media, like getting a bunch of likes and then forgetting about it, right? That was my kind of thought process for a while, like get that instant gratification and then move on. But in doing this project and my other books, which are longer, I really found a lot of joy in like the editing process, how you can take something that's kind of like a raw material, almost like your rough draft, and editing and polishing and refining it. It made me have a lot more confidence in my like own abilities as an artist. And it really taught me a lot in terms of how to, make a narrative. Um, I never was like a narrative first person. I was always kind of the art first. I'd spend a lot of time on the art. But in doing this, in editing a lot, I realized that like, oh, I can actually like have experimental visuals as well as like a very followable narrative that, actually does tell a story. Here's just some of the edits. I mean, like some of the comics in this book are like, when you read them, they're very short and fast, and you wouldn't think that's like so much work has been put into them. But actually, like even this story, which I feel like is the most like simple narrative in the collection, you can see how many different drafts I did. Like every line, every kind of paragraph here was like a different draft for the text for this project. And it's intentionally small. I don't really want to show off all the rough drafts because it's kind of embarrassing. But if you ever were to read this one, you can actually see that there's like so much more going on. Here's another one, which is like only 8 panels. And again, it wouldn't seem like something that has taken a lot of time and experimentation and refining and revising. In this story, um, you're like this kind of nameless character, and you go into this like Minecraft style castle, and you find this like semi-sentient NPC who's just been there for like trillions of years waiting for his user to come back online. It's very quick, but it actually, like, I revised it so many times and I edited the art so many times. This is like one of like 3 or 4 Illustrator files, right, that just has all the different kind of pacings and layouts. The last story in the collection is the longest one. It's probably about half the length of the book total. I think it's about 100 pages. It's called The Cursed Lover. And in this story, it's probably the most straightforward comic of anything I've ever wrote. Like where we really do just kind of read the panels like a normal comic. And you can see like my artboard here where I laid everything out and I tried so many different endings. I was working on this project in 2018 and like really hit a wall. I couldn't figure out how to like go forward with the narrative. I didn't really know what it was about, but I always wanted to come back to it. So I, reopened everything when I was working on curses and dove into this pretty heavily. Um, Here's some of the art from it. I really wanted the art to look like something from like another dimension, like no human had ever had a hand in it. It's kind of intentionally very bad, but also kind of surreal and weird and creepy. Um, this is kind of the central character who introduces a bunch of chaos to this town, and then all these events kind of unfold after that. I think that's it. That's all I got. Thank you.
Hi. I'm Rachelle Meyer. I do work in assignment as an illustrator, and besides that, I feel like I'm always working on some kind of personal project. It's usually story-based, art-based kind of project. It's a little bit of a compulsion besides having a creative career. And I think probably a lot of you guys are the same. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is I'm kind of in the middle of a graphic novel journey. And I thought I would start talking about it by going back to my previous larger personal projects that I've worked on over the past few years, because it all kind of leads up to the place I am today. So this is the first one I'd like to talk about, which is, can you see the movie? Did the movie work? Yeah. I was wondering about that. So a few years ago, I moved from the center of Amsterdam to Amsterdam North, which is separated from the rest of Amsterdam by a body of water. And that meant I was taking a ferry to my studio every day to work. And I wanted to make a good use of my time on this ferry, which is about a 12-minute ride. So I kind of created this challenge for myself to sketch other passengers on the ferry in pencil. And then by the time I'd get to my studio, I'd make a cup of coffee and finish it off in fine liners and markers. And what happened was, when I finished this little sketchbook, I felt like there was a kind of unintentional story that I found from all of these sketches put together. Not just of how people spent their time, but how time slips through the seasons, because in that little book you see the seasons switch from winter to spring. So for the first time in my life, I kind of launched a project through a combination of crowdfunding and getting a grant from the city. And that became this project called Faces on the Ferry, which was portraits of fellow passengers, and the idea of showing the seasons through this kind of slow melt of different color palettes. And I really wanted to push myself stylistically to make this kind of bolder graphic style. So it was an exploration of different art forms. And this seasonal collection was exhibited as a bunch of screen prints that I pulled myself, along with a film of the sketchbook. And I started getting pretty good press for this project. This is the local Amsterdam paper with a bondportretten, that just means the ferry portraits. And you may recognize this Guardian newspaper as well, in which they referred to my project as a cartoon, which at the time I thought was a little bit off, but I think they may have been into something and had an idea of where I'd be going with my career over the next few years. So this project was going pretty well, and I had all these new exhibitions planned, and I was making new artwork for them. And then you may recognize this little guy. And the whole thing kind of came to a halt, because I was creating for this kind of fine art world of public exhibitions, and I couldn't really see any way to pivot with that project to do it differently. And I just had to kind of figure out, well, what else can I do as far as this urge I have all the time to be creating something of my own and putting out into the world. And that's actually when I turned to comics. So I had this idea that I wanted to create a series of chick tract parodies about my religious upbringing in Texas. And the way I approached this one, having learned a little bit of how to do these things from crowdfunding before, was I did a kind of proof of concept piece by creating the first book called Holy Diver. And then I set that out for reviews to a few different places and crowdfunded the whole holy trilogy of chick tract parodies called Texas Tracts. And just to give you a little insight into what the content is like, this is a sample page. Have you ever attended a rosary recited in the cadence of a cattle auction? I have. And I think that's the general tone of this book. It's kind of funny and warm, and I think offers a balanced perspective, because for me, as a stranger in a strange land, I feel like I'm often called upon to explain the world I grew up in to other people. And I try to do my best to show it from all sides. So this was my second crowdfunded project. And then an unexpected opportunity happened, which was that I received an email from the cartoon editor at the New Yorker, and she invited me to submit. This is very similar to Sarah's experience. I tuned in to listen when she gave a presentation a couple of months ago. And I remember I was sitting in this chair, and I was so surprised when I got the email that I stood up, and then I walked around my chair and I sat back down again because I thought it was just very odd. It's like a lightning bolt. But however it came about, I thought, well, this is something definitely worth striving for. And I received this email in October 2021, and my second submission was published in March of 2022. And it's this piece called The Last Guide to Literary Conflict You'll Ever Need. And it's still very dear to my heart for obvious reasons. And it's quite a short piece, so I'm just going to lead you through it. Okay. So you start off here with man versus man, man versus nature, man versus self, man versus virus, man versus democracy, man versus science, man versus time, cockroach versus cockroach. So that kind of opened the doors to other publications. In 2022, it was kind of a bumper crop for me as far as getting work in the New Yorker and the New York Times and my hometown paper of the Austin Chronicle, doing a lot of short comic pieces. And then, knock, knock, on an unexpected opportunity, take two. After that piece was published, I got a message on Facebook from someone who I've known kind of socially for a while, or just through social media. And she said, I assume you already have a literary agent, but if not, and if you have stories in you that you want to tell, let me know. And I feel sorry for this poor woman, because I don't think at the time she understood that I had the digital equivalent of shoe boxes and shoe boxes of stories that I could share with her. But I tried to kind of cull it down to about half a dozen, and I sent her this, incredibly heavy WeTransfer of like, here's all this stuff I make, have a look. And So this is the project that we both thought had the most potential, and it's called Wolf House Fables. At the time when I first started developing this story 7 years ago, and I had some slides of my original sketches of this story, but my lecture was running over, so I cut them out. But anyway, so I was developing it as a chapter book, an illustrated chapter book. But given what I've been doing lately, and also my interest in maybe presenting it to a more mature audience, we decided it would be good to transition and turn it into a graphic novel. So as a short summary of what the story is about, an estimated 200 to 300 people hid from the Nazis in Artis Zoo during World War II. In Wolf House Fables, we discover these Onderduikers through the curiosity of Peter and Rosie Decker, the children of one of the zookeepers. As we get to know Dove, Cornelius, and Joe, they reveal their own stories in ways that suit their personalities. Dove is an elegant Jewish lady who spins fantastical fairy tales out of her personal experiences. Cornelius is a nonconformist, a poet, and a contributor to the underground resistance papers. Joe is a US fighter pilot who temporarily takes shelter in Artis, processing his PTSD by drawing action-packed comics. Meanwhile, within the Decker family, the risk-averse conservative father, Dirk, is unaware that his wife, Lotte, is secretly working for the resistance. So this is the story in a nutshell. And because of my previous experiences with being able to fund an art project through local grants, I thought, well, this one seems perfect for a grant because it's all about the city. It's the history of the city. So I'm going to start applying for grants just to finish my book proposal, which is what I use with my agent to take to publishers. So I apply for a grant, and I wanted to talk about how working on a larger project like this can be kind of chopped up into more consumable, smaller, bite-sized pieces. And I think just the process of doing a crowdfunding or applying for grants really helps you make progress on these larger pieces. So applying for a grant the first time helped me finish my story outline, finish doing a full cast of character sketches. Yes, I have patterned the upstairs neighbor on Art Spiegelman because it only seems appropriate. He's also a resistance member, and he's an interesting character. I got letters of intent from my agent, who I subsequently signed with during this process. And I piqued the interest of one Dutch publisher, and it helped me define my purpose and drive. Unfortunately, I didn't get the grant that time, but I was told by the people at the grant office that I was very close, and if I worked more closely with other Dutch cultural institutions, it would probably give me a better shot at the grant the second time. So, applying for grants, take two. I got a very nice letters of intent from the director of the Dutch Resistance Museum, who's been a really wonderful contact, and someone at the Institute for War, Holocaust, and Genocide Studies, who's a scholar who specializes in World War II comics. And you think, can someone actually do that as a course of study? Apparently it is possible. He's a really nice guy. My story outline was vetted by historians at the Dutch Resistance Museum for plausibility, and I was able to revise it based on those notes. It helped me define the themes that were really important to me, and it also helped me create a few sample pages for my second application, which I can share with you now. So this is, should I read these out? Grandpa, Rosie's scared. She won't come out from under her table. but we think she might if you ask her. Well, I'm a pretty persuasive guy. Gracias, Grandpa, graag gedaan, Maria. It's a new millennium and the world didn't explode, but we might. There's enough food here to last another 1,000 years. How different things are from when I was his age. I like to think that people have gotten smarter, nicer. I want to be optimistic, but sometimes I still see wolves in the shadows. I try to make a difference in the world. Just getting up off the floor again after this will be enough of a challenge for now. Hello, Rosie. Hi, Grandpa. Looks pretty cozy. Mind if I squeeze in? You know who you remind me of right now? Your sister, Rosie? No, well, yes, you always remind me of her, at least a little bit. Someone else, actually a few different people. Some of them were funny, some were brave, and they were all very good at telling stories. Would you like me to tell you one about them? And that's it. That's all I've got for you. Hey, so this is me. I was also going to put a slide in about my agent, but I was trying to cut my time down. Her name is Jennifer Chavez, and she's at the Rights Factory. She is open to queries right now. So if you are looking for an agent, you're welcome to query her. This is my website and my email, and I sell stuff. I make stuff, as I said. I'm on Instagram. I am on Blue Sky, but I don't really know how to use it yet. So you can find me there and teach me how to use it. And that's all I've got.
So this is the hard bit. Back in 1999, I was living in New Zealand and I got the worst phone call of my life. My dad had had a brain aneurysm. It was a Sunday. It took a full 48 hours before I could even get a flight home. And then I had this horrific journey home. My life just changed totally. I was 23 and it all just went pear-shaped. So about 18 months after he died, I had a really terrible night out. I had been working like 3 jobs and I was drinking a lot, and I worked in a bar. I grew up in a pub, and I was picking fights with really massive men. So at the time I was about a size 8, so I don't know what that is in US or whatever, but UK size 8, so I was very slim. I'm only 5'4", and yeah, I had a bouncer I knew my whole life, a security guard who pulled me aside. He'd been in prison 3 times for GBH, and he told me I had a problem. So I went and got some help. It turned out I had depression and anxiety. It was grief triggered. I laugh because I'm nervous because I'm still a very anxious person. So it wasn't funny. It was a horrific time, but I just find it really hard not to try and make light of it. I did cognitive behavioral therapy. I worked with a psychotherapist who was very strange and not actually very good. He was just obsessed with the pub that I grew up in because we used to have sawdust on the floor, and he was convinced we were cowboys. We weren't. They were all Australians and New Zealanders in London, but I couldn't get him beyond that idea. But he did get me to do CBT, and part of it was also going back to drawing. I've always drawn. And I went and started, I went back actually and redid my foundation, which I left to go traveling, and which took me to New Zealand. I went back and redid it, and then I did an illustration degree, illustration animation at Kingston University in London. And from that, I learned observational drawing and rediscovered a love for drawing from life and on location. So these are some of my life drawing. As soon as I graduated, I was offered a job teaching life drawing at the university, and one of my students was the graphic novelist Nika Badzis, who did the wonderful Leica, and actually told me all about Ladies Do Comics because I met Rachel Ball and Wallace Eates through Nick. Anyway, I spoke to Nick about how I'd had ambitions. I'd always read comics about making comics and how do I go about it, and he just said, you just make comics. You just go and do it. So I started going to in-person LDCs, and I just started developing. So one of my big things was to read the actual books, and as you can see, including Billy and Me and You from Nicholas Streeton. I was pregnant at the time, Nicholas, so that was quite an intense read. Actually, being pregnant was a really great time to start reading up on stuff, and I listened to loads of audiobooks. It was, however, an absolutely appalling time to try and make a graphic novel because I lost all mental faculties. I couldn't write, I couldn't draw. Then I had my baby, and fortunately I could get back to it. So I started sketching out the ideas. I did that in a range of things. I've got like loads of like sketchbooks like this, which have loads of crazy tiny drawings in them. It's quite hard doing this backwards. You can see some of them on screen. I've got little notebooks, and then I use my drawing board over here where I'd have A2 sheets of animation paper because I used to do hand-drawn animation. And a friend of mine gifted, Pedro Serrazino, is a Portuguese animator, gifted me a whole bag of animation paper on the proviso that I made a graphic novel with it one day. So I did. So take that, Pedro. He's a very nice man. One of the other things I did was quite an unusual script for this. I found that because it was quite a personal story, I really wanted to do it as quite automatic drawing and trying to get the sketches out without worrying about panels or anything like that. So I just sketched straight in with biro. And then I would make sort of scene cards. So I would know roughly what was going to happen in the scene. And then I would start developing that into more of a script and start building the story from that. I made several attempts at the first couple of chapters, particularly the first chapters. And one of the main things was finding out, originally it was going to be from my perspective, and I was going to have a version of me in the book. And I found that I kept writing myself too nice, and I kept not being really honest about how difficult a person I was at the time and how hard I was to help. You know, no one who knew me knew I was going through depression and anxiety. They just thought I was really spiky and aggressive, and I cut a really unsympathetic figure. So picturing that was really hard, and doing it as me. Also, I'd had in that time friends who were sectioned. I found out a lot more about my grandmother who was sectioned. I wasn't sectioned. I was lucky enough to get a private help. But finding out what people go through that aren't that lucky made me think more and more about how I would have fared in that situation and how much worse it would have been. I started also researching into kind of the mental health systems in the UK, particularly in the 1990s when I had my breakdown. And I really wanted to bring a little bit of everything on that. So I created this character, Alex Otto, who is going to be sectioned. And through her, I could be more honest. So everything that Alex feels and says, apart from being sectioned, is something I've been through and how my depression sort of manifested. It took me ages to find the style. I finally made this spread, and it was my first spread where I went, oh, this is it. I finally found it, because I wanted to depict the black dog of depression, and I'd come across loads of kind of folklore about old Shuck and Cerberus and all these links to these kind of black dogs, and it really felt, for me, I was quite an angry depressive, so I really wanted to have this kind of physicality of the dog, and I had this idea of it pulling up out of the floor of the hospital, and this is my animator side coming to the fore. But I did actually make a sting, and I was going to put that in here. I did animate the dog coming out of the floor, and it was just a lot of work, and I thought I'm never going to be able to animate this because it'll take forever, but I've got the book anyway. So I found this style, and I knew I was kind of on to something, so I took that and found Lizzie Kay, who was my original editor. She commissioned it, we crowdfunded it, and she encouraged me, along with the Lakes Comic Art Festival, who put money into the crowdfund, to apply for an Arts Council grant. So it took me 3 months to apply for that. I spent writing it. I went to Nicholas Streeton's, who did a one-day workshop, which really helped. And I also met James Trevelyan, who was at Arts Council at the time. I don't know if he's still there, but he He did a lot of back and forth with me on my application. We did about 4 or 5 drafts, I think, and I got it first time, which was amazing. So I had to do it, helped pay for the print run of the book, my like half the print run costs. It paid me to draw the art for the rest of the book, which is the great thing about Arts Council, and it helped me have time to like really spend that time making it as good as possible. So I did loads of visual research for Barking because it's set in a hospital, and I also wanted it to feel really emblematic of the place I wanted it set along. Where so Alex's friend has died. She's just her body is discovered one day when Alex was supposed to meet her. She's sectioned 18 months down the line when her life has kind of fallen apart because this dog has manifested. It all happens on the South Bank of London. So one of the things I did was actually go to the South Bank of London and draw on site. I started bringing the practice of using carbon typewriter sheets. This is them. They're very light and fluffy. And I would do things like, I don't know if you can see that. This is my drawing that I did in Blackfriars and that I did on site looking at Blackfriars Bridge. And the one on screen, I went down onto the banks of the Thames and I drew by the riverside because it's quite a crucial part. I hate the idea that everyone thinks that comic artists can just draw anything from the top of their head when every comic artist I know takes ridiculous pictures of themselves. So these are some of mine. Barking's quite a dark book, so there's no fun parts, but I've got some much better ones, like when I did a Black Hammer and I went around in my daughter's Harry Potter cape and drew myself with all sorts of things like drawing pins. So don't be afraid to use reference. It's really important and it's really helpful in getting people to kind of get to grips with where you are. Also in the corner, you can see a blade pen, which is my Dan Berry pen. Dan is a comic artist himself, but he makes these really beautiful dip pens, and I use that with the carbon, and I drew most of Barking with it. Anyway, so one of the things I realized as I was making it was that I needed to sort of keep in touch with my own mental health. So I made a bunch of kind of zines, which is a set called My 1 in 4 zines, which are all here. The image on the right, the woman with her head back and the tree coming out, is from that zine. These are a set that I've just had printed up. They're just 4 zines to just kind of get to grips with my mental health and remind me of what I wanted to put into it. Because I think you get onto a book about depression and it's such a huge sort of gamut of things you could talk about. And then I also wanted to talk about the NHS, and it was really hard to get kind of easy to get overwhelmed by it. So it's hard to kind of shorten it. So I started coming up with key things that I wanted to put into the book. And one of them was this like angry figure, someone who was really, really difficult to help. And how, for me, my depression was like a voice that just kind of shouts really shitty things at me. So the dog physically does that, and kind of getting that lettering in place was really key to how I wanted to present the book. Like I said, I sort of sketched it out. I didn't have layout plans, so every page is laid out on Photoshop. So I would scan everything in, and then I would start picking the bits I like. I hate panels. It stresses me out. Like the idea of drawing into tiny little boxes and trying to keep neat is just like torture to me. I'm a very messy artist, and I can't do that. So what I do is I have a bank of lines that I just draw really, really quickly. And you can see them here quite roughly. I slot them in as I feel. I'd have like this little library. I also have a library of smudges and smears and scribbles, and I use them to start building up the dog. Or it's a little bit of a spoiler, but Alex's friend reappears in the hospital. She's dead and living on the ceiling, or part of Alex's shadow. And so I have this like always this black smear that connects Alex either to her black dog or her dead friend. So that's all built out of like smudges from carbon and biro and stuff. And you can see it's really quite loose. And here I put in hand lettered text. And this is when I realized that it was absolutely not going to show up well enough for print. I had complete panic, went on Twitter and asked people what they do and everyone said you get a font made. So it turned out Dan Berry also makes fonts. So he made me a typable font with my own handwriting. So this is made with dip pen and carbon, and then scanned in, and then Dan's put it together and made it a typable font, which was just a complete lifesaver, and meant that there was, because it's such a kind of difficult way of writing anyway, it made it much more legible. Although I still get complaints from some people about the legibility, but you know, it's all part of the book. She's lost her mind. It shouldn't be too clear. Anyway, so I take these layers in, I start cleaning it up, adjusting the levels. A lot of them, some of these pages have like 50, 60 layers in them. And they're all on kind of multiply layers. Put the font in, and then I've added digital links just to kind of really whack it up. So that's done on Photoshop with Kyle's brushes, which I think are now a plugin, but I'd bought mine to begin with. And this is a Big Burn charcoal brush, which is really lovely and unruly. Okay, so as I said, there were some specific topics that I really wanted to cover with barking. One of them was that I found a statistic that said you were more likely, it was something like 5 times more likely to be physically restrained and sedated if you were a black man or a girl under 20 years old. I found that a really, really difficult thing to imagine. It was also really likely that if you'd had a mental breakdown and you were a girl under 20 or in your 20s, that you would have probably suffered some form of sexual assault. So obviously that would be really triggering. I had suffered sexual assault during my grief period, so this was like a really major thing for me that I wanted to include. And it was quite a difficult thing to put in the book, but I felt it was a really important thing to talk about, because I was very spiky if anyone came near me, obviously. Another thing was an anecdote from a friend who was sectioned, and on her first night, someone held her up against a wall with a screwdriver to her neck and tried to kill her. And this was in the mental health ward. And she managed to deal with it, but there was like all sorts of things happening within the ward. And I think my comment I wanted to make was about the umbrella health system that the NHS has to operate under. And you know, nothing against the NHS as a thing. It's just that mental health is so bloody complicated, and the idea that you can just put everyone in one ward and it's going to be fine, and that includes people who are a danger to themselves and people who are a danger to others, is kind of pretty crazy in itself. So I wanted to say something about that. The final thing I wanted to really make sure I got across was that if someone is going through a mental health crisis, it's really unlikely that they can hear you over their own internal dialogue. So I really wanted to make a point about how loud your head can be when people are talking to you, and then they get angry at you for not listening. And if you're in a position where the authority are trying to talk to you, like the police or nurses, and you can't hear them, that must be pretty terrifying. So really wanted to get that across as well. And so I wanted to show you what it's like when I draw with carbon, because people often kind of wonder about that. So as you can see, this is actually using a light box. This is the latest cover, and I thought I'd show you some of how that looks. I've got my iPad there because I used my little dog who's asleep over here was my model for the dog's face to make sure I got it right. You can see how ephemeral it is. Like, I've got this blade pen in this video, and I'm just sort of scratching in. I tend to use my fingernails quite a lot. I use kind of stop and sticks, or I use some really sharp dip pens when I want them. And I think it gives a really amazing quality. You can buy these really cheaply online, or from stationers. They come in a range of colours. The yellow's not great, the red's really wonderful. The blue's fantastic, and you can get different sizes. I really recommend trying them. You do, if you want to do larger scale work, I don't think they come bigger than A3, but you can like tape them together like I've done here. And there's a brand called Stevens Typewriter brand, which I think I've got here. No, those are the ones I don't like. It's called Stevens Typewriter. It's really, really great. So I recommend trying it. And yeah, and that's it. That's the final image, and I have it here. This is how it looked in the end. And And yeah, so these are the last details. So we launch with Avery Hill next February on the 27th, and that goes out in the US and Canada as well. I'm really excited that I'm going to be at Toronto Comic Art Festival. So if anyone's going to be there, come and say hi, because it's just deeply exciting to be there. That's next May. And on the 29th of February, we're going to have a launch party at Gosh. So if you're in London, please join us. And I'm going to do signings and sketches in the Carbon and just chatting and having a generally really lovely night. And I'm going to do a load of kind of little sketch cards for Gosh. I've got some thank you cards printed up and stuff. And if you can't make it, Avery Hill pre-orders open now, and I think the first 100 came with a book plate fashioned here. There you go. So you can get that too if you go to Avery Hill. So yeah, I'll stop the share and thank you.
All right. Thank you for your patience. I'm gonna now present to you the winner of the first graphic novel prize. I have with me Alex Taylor. Hi, Alex.
Hello everyone, I'm Alex Taylor. My comic is Bone Broth, and I'm just won the first graphic novel competition. I'm very grateful to everybody involved.
All right. That's it, everybody. Back to your online global meeting. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Lana.
Thank you.